little bit of a switch, so it took a second. Okay, so we will start share my screen. Okay, so one of the things that we will do right away is go through the questions in the back of the chapter. Okay, all right. What is a concept? Give me 3 examples. So let's start with what is a concept?
An explanation for an idea?
Nope. What is a concept? Think of a concept. Give me an example of a concept, Aretha.
How persons with dementia retain memory?
No, an example of a concept is health, wealth, physical fitness, educational attainment. So you should be able to have examples ready at your hand, but you should also be able to explain what it is. And Marianne in class, you can use your textbook while we're having lecture. It's not a quiz at the moment. It will be for your midterm exam. So at the moment, that's absolutely fine. So if you want, you can keep your book in front of you too. It's not a bad thing. You're still using a resource to learn. A concept, as Marianne says, is a basket of ideas, a collection of ideas. Health is a collection of many ideas, some of which that you can express in words, some of which you can't, but you all have the general idea that, you know, there is a thing called health and there are many things that can explain it. So 3 examples of concepts that are not health, wealth, and educational attainment because I already volunteered them.
Happiness?
Okay, very good. Happiness is a concept.
Well-being. It's kind of the same, but I guess it's like health.
Sure. We'll take that. It is different. So, and it is still a basket of ideas. I'm just going to admit a couple of students who have just entered. There we go. All right. Well-being, happiness. One more.
Would love be a concept?
Sure. Because again, it's a collection of ideas. We all kind of understand what love is, but how each one of us measures or understands love could be different, right? So that's fine. Those are all reasonable examples of concepts. Okay, question 2. Why aren't variables used in qualitative research? Why don't we use variables in qualitative research?
Are variables the measurable ones?
So,
it's like concrete, and qualitative research is not, it's more about experiences. So it's not as concrete. It's not the same for everybody, for every individual tested.
So yes, all that is correct. And the best way to answer this question, I find, is to first talk about what a variable is. So let's talk about what a variable is and say why we can't use it in qualitative research. So anytime you write an answer, think of it as you're explaining to somebody who has no clue. I often think about my 93-year-old grandmother who, wonderful, wonderful lady, you know, she didn't have the opportunity for an education, but whenever I have to explain something, I think, how would I explain this to grandma? Right? And it always breaks it down well for me. So you don't have to think about your grandma. Everyone's grandma is different, and but think like you're explaining to a 5-year-old child, but perhaps in a little advanced manner because you don't want to break it down all that much. But okay, so let's start with what are variables. What is a variable? It's a type, it's a subset or type of concept. Type / subset, that came from Marianne in class. Okay, it is a type of concept, but there are some limitations of that concept, because what do you know about a variable? It has to do a couple of things. It has to, obviously, Must be observable. Observable is important, but more interesting is it has to be measurable.
Something that you can have more or less of.
Something that varies or more or less.
Also, doesn't it have to be
Sorry, Samantha, could you try that again? You broke up a little.
reproducible?
Sorry, Samantha, we had a hard time hearing you. Could you please try again? Just saying what you said. Some issues with
Yeah, sorry, I got a scratchy throat. Doesn't it have to be reproducible?
Reproducible.
Yeah.
Okay, so not sure what happened there. Did you guys lose my screen?
The screen changed. Now it's an open screen.
Okay, I'm just going to go back to sharing my screen. You should be back on the questions themselves. Okay, so basically, variable can vary or be measurable, right? It has to exist in one of many states. And so the issue is the reason that you can't use it, and it's usually numerical. And I think Samantha mentioned that there's a reproducibility to it. More than reproducibility, the variable. I'm sorry, I keep getting messages that my internet connection is unstable. I'm not sure why, and I apologize. It's been behaving itself. Can you, one of you, do me a favor, just unlock the door, because it may be communicating better to the Wi-Fi if the door is open. Okay, yeah, if you want to just pull it open. Sorry. Normally I don't like to, so people who are not in the physical classroom, normally I don't like to keep the door open, because coincidentally every time I'm in a lecture, the floors are being cleaned and we have vacuum cleaners running and people dropping stuff outside. So we try to shut the door, but it also can affect internet connectivity, especially if Laurentian's having a bad day. So it is Monday morning, we'll give Laurentian a break and keep the door open. Okay. All right. So because it can vary, a variable can vary, it can have many states, it must be observable and measurable. And these are all things you already said in class. So it's not, I'm not creating anything new. I just briefly lost connection, hence I lost my list. Observation and measurability. So the issue with all of this is, if you are measuring centimeters or inches or pounds or kilograms, it's fine for qualitative research, but that's not what we do in quantitative research. That's what you can do. But in qualitative research, we're not necessarily looking for variables, because the variation is not something that is observable and measurable. Does reading about the Holocaust upset you? Or what do you think about the Holocaust when you talk to survivors of the Holocaust, or whose families have been involved in the Holocaust, or who have experienced great loss and pain? It's almost impossible to have something measurable. You will probably experience a great deal of sadness, a great deal of pain, a great deal of discomfort when thinking about the topic or discussing the topic. But it's almost impossible to put a number unless you artificially create variables. But for all practical purposes, you will have a lot of interviews where it will be impossible for you to put a number to it. And that's why you can't use variables in qualitative research. Okay. All right. We're on a roll here. We're getting them all right. We're doing a good job. What is a hypothesis?
Is it a statement that predicts relationship between variables?
Thank you, Connie. That is that is exactly the definition. We do not need to go any further. For those of you, I'm sure everybody heard it. Did you guys in class, did you hear what Connie said? Statement that connects two variables. Okay, so it's basically, you have to remember that it's a statement. It can connect to concepts also. So I will say concepts and variables. And but the key thing is it is a statement. Okay. You can diagram a hypothesis, you can make boxes, and you can relate one concept to another. But for the most part, what it is it is a statement. Why doesn't qualitative methodology use hypothesis? Go, Aretha. Oh, come on, you know it.
Oh my gosh, qualitative. Because a hypothesis predicts between variables, qualitative does not focus so much on variables, so it's not would not be appropriate to use that methodology, the hypothesis. Oh, I know what I'm saying, but that didn't sound so straight.
Well, we'll find it. Does anybody want to jump in on what Aretha said? Because she offered two different pieces of information, which are both relevant.
We don't measure in qualitative, and you use a research objective instead of a hypothesis in qualitative.
So let's look at the question again. Why don't we use a hypothesis? Because we're not focused on variables and we're not measuring.
No.
All right.
Is it because in qualitative research, we're not trying to prove like a direct association between, you know, A and B? We're more trying to just explore.
Ding, 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 lucky winner.
Right.
Good job, Cassie. Yes. So what we are not trying to do in qualitative is we're not suggesting or stating that there is a relationship. Not stating a relationship. Samantha, I know you're trying to say something, but for some reason we can't pick up on your audio because I think you had a comment.
It's okay. I'm not trying to say something yet.
Oh, okay. Sorry, never mind. You know what it does? I have a little window thing on my screen, and it lights up when people are trying to say something. So I often wonder, well, did it just turn up, or did they try to make a comment and I'm getting bad audio? Sorry, I understand if you have to say something, and if you did say something and the class just went on like nothing happened, then your audio is not working. Otherwise, your audio is just fine. Okay, I get it. Okay, great. So we're not stating the relationships. That's very important. That's probably the most important reason why we don't use a hypothesis. Basically, a hypothesis is a statement suggesting a relationship. So yeah, we're not stating a relationship. We're not focusing on variables, and we're not measuring variables. These are the reasons why we don't use a hypothesis in qualitative research. Okay, so we already answered what's a variable, so I'm not going to go ahead and flog a dead horse. What is the difference between an independent and a dependent variable? So independent variable, dependent variable. I mean, it's not a list of differences, but you can attempt to tell me what you think the differences are.
So I would say that an independent variable is one that will continue like no matter what, whereas the dependent variable will change based on the independent variable.
Okay, so this is the variable. Thank you. So this is the variable.
Fixed. That's the word I was looking for. One's fixed and one is dependent on the fixed variable.
Okay. Oh, I'm not sure why my pen isn't writing. Okay, there we go. variable changes regardless of dv.
And
And the
the
dependent
independent variable is the cause, or it will, maybe cause is not the best word, but and the dependent variable is the effect.
Yes, so it can, so if you want to say it's a cause and effect, you don't want to say that it is, but you can say it can be occasionally labeled as the cause. And dependent variable is more seen as the effect. That's very good. So it's nice that you're thinking about independent dependent variables that way. The dependent variable obviously changes with the independent variable, changes based on independent variable. Okay, so okay, excellent. That I think that's enough of a difference to work with. Okay, why are variables selected?
Variables are selected as a part of the defining process of the question or the research. For example, if you, in your design, you would decide what, whether you're going to use empirical, or what form of empirical variables to be used. And that's probably more distinctive between the qualitative and the quantitative, right? Because in the design, if you're doing qualitative, it's not variable dependent, because that would not be the best method for a qualitative. For a quantitative, yes.
So the way to think about this question, yeah, you're right. I mean, you all have the answer. I know this class, pretty much everybody, I'm quite confident, knows the answer. It's about presenting the answer. A lot of responding to questions in a test or an exam is not what you know, but how you present it. So when you write it out, this is what I want you to talk about. Why are variables selected? So you start to think about a concept and its representative variables. So think of a concept such as health, okay? Think of a variable, absence of diseases, if you want that as variable. What's the difference between something like health and the absence of chronic diseases or number of chronic diseases? Is measurability, right? You want variable because a variable is measurable. The other thing that absence of chronic disease does for health is, instead of saying being joyful is measurable, is a variable for health, absence of diseases is something you can actually count, document, and it's going to change. And it is representative. No, you won't have too many people argue saying the absence of disease cannot be used as a variable of health. It's not a complete variable, but it is a measure. So you'd have to say that, yeah, it's a variable. It may not be the best variable, but it is a variable, and it does in several contexts accurately represent health. Okay, so the other thing is representation of the concept.
Are you referring to validity of the variable?
Yes. Okay. And then you want to select variables. Why are variables selected, right? So it offers measurability. It validly represents the concept. And the thing about variable is, again, we think more about a variable. It can vary, it can change. So you can actually observe the change. And the best thing about it is it can exist. So everything about a variable, the whole paragraph, the whole 9 yards about a variable, that's what is expected here, okay? So it can exist in one of many states. Okay, all right. Now next what we're going to do is we're going to look at a table, and we're going to kind of end up having more than just one variable, because I want us to think as a class. Okay, so your concept is health. Let's think of multiple multiple variables for health. What can we say? So we already said absence of diseases, so we won't do that. How else can we measure health? So I want variables. I want actual measurables. So we don't want a concept to be a variable for another concept. So
Blood pressure?
blood pressure, I like that. Okay, one more. Okay, body temperature, basically presence or absence of a fever or hypothermia. Okay, and it's not broadly usable, but there are some contexts in where it would be very usable, like a flu epidemic or the current coronavirus epidemic, right? If you're measuring people who look like they already have the disease, they probably will have an elevated temperature. Okay.
How about like glucose levels?
Sorry, what was that?
Glucose levels.
Blood glucose, especially if you're thinking about diabetics. So it is context specific variables, but they can represent good health in certain contexts. Resting heart rate.
In some cases, you could use BMI.
BMI. Okay. I like how everyone's thinking. This is good. I see all the wheels turning. Well, I don't see all, but I think they are. This is beautiful. So we have a lot of different variables for optimum health. Not all are valid in all circumstances, but depending on the circumstance, these different measures can be used to suggest health or lack of it. Great. Okay, next, marital happiness. Let's have variables for marital happiness.
Ability to communicate effectively.
So let's have a measurable. I like the idea, but how would you measure that? What are we counting?
Income?
Marital happiness. A measure for marital happiness is income. Can you explain that a little better?
So we can combine both partners' income for like just happiness for living in a house, like that kind of stuff. Like,
okay, so what you're saying is
cool off. You know what I mean?
The greater the amount of financial freedom a couple has, the greater there will be marital happiness.
Yes.
Something like that?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, so yes. So if you define the context, you can absolutely use combined income, because I think that's where Kylie was going with it.
From her, a spin-off from what she just said.
Yeah.
A result of the combined income would relieve stress because they're better able to meet financial obligations. Therefore, there'll be less quarrels or arguments or disagreements between them.
That's yes, and that's a good explanation. But I want more concepts now. I want more variables now. So we have one variable, which is combined income. Jesse says
Free time?
Jesse in class says number of hours spent together.
Right. I was going to say that. Intimate contact.
Hours
How about number of unresolved conflicts?
a number of conflicts. Is that what you said, Samantha?
It's Connie. I said, yeah, number of unresolved conflicts.
Number of unresolved conflicts. Oh boy. It is absolutely a valid measure. So
this may be part of the demographic, but how about how many children they have, as far as like whether people with one child are more happy than people with 10.
So do you have a feeling as to one way or the other? Do you have
No, but it would be interesting to find out.
Yes, it would. It would. But can the number of children is so? This is where we come to whether a variable is accurately representing a concept. Does the number of children, is that a predictor for the amount of marital happiness? And I don't know the answer to that.
But it could impact the amount of quality time they spend together as a couple.
Oh, so okay, so the more children you have, the less time you have as a couple with each other, so that could impact marital happiness. Is that what you're
That's
suggesting?
what I was thinking, yes.
Oh, okay. You guys, so Marianne says it would impact financial combined income as well, so there can be a genuine impact with larger family size, Courtney says. Okay. Number of kids. Go, Courtney. Number of years spent together. So what would you propose, Courtney? Number of years spent together, is that good? Is that bad?
How about challenges? Overcoming the amount of challenges they overcome as the relationship progresses, ages. Because like there could be the death of one person's mom.
So would you say number of significant challenges faced as a couple?
Yes, the more they endure, I guess the more
Significant challenges endured, because these are all countable, and that's why I'm asking you for countable representation. And I like that number of significant challenges endured, because really if they're stuck together through a bunch of really difficult stuff, it could go either way, and I get that. But we are making a hypothesis. We are suggesting that if a couple spent a lot of difficult times together and supported each other, then coming out of it, the relationship is stronger and there's greater marital happiness. Okay, good. So now we're thinking about variables, things that actually change. So excellent. Nutritional adequacy.
So how many square meals a day one has?
Retha, and then Charlotte was next. Okay, number of square meals. Per day. Charlotte, go.
I was going to say amount of saturated fat consumed. And I
Sorry,
know
amount of?
saturated fat consumed.
Saturated fat.
Well, grams of sugar in their diet.
Amount of saturated fat, we're getting very specific. Amount of sugar. Sorry, there is a little bit of a well, let's see who's. Okay, so that reverb was coming from one computer. Sugar. Now, when you're thinking about variables, when you're thinking about nutritional adequacy, you have to think about the statement that ties the two, right? Or what's a good variable? And when you think about amount of saturated fat or amount of sugar, you're talking about grams of fat or grams of sugar. I assume that's where you folks are going with this, per meal or per day, right?
Right.
Okay.
But also, what about their financial status? Because some people are unable to purchase the better nutritional choices.
We're looking at adequacy of nutrition. Yes, we understand that limitations in finance will impact your ability to procure nutrition itself. But we are talking about what are the different measures of whether the person is getting enough nutrition. So you have to think about what you can measure to see if they're getting enough nutrition in the first place, right?
We can measure their urine output or their BMs a day as well.
Yeah.
So measure biologicals.
Yeah.
Correct. Are they getting
also
enough?
checked, you could also check vitamins in the bloodstream.
Yes. I didn't know I was malnourished for almost 7 years with a significant deficiency of vitamin D until I had a blood panel done last year. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm fine. I eat all fruits and vegetables. Sorry, I know I'm going off topic. I apologize, but that was a very good example. And I'm just thinking, yeah, your blood tests can often identify deficiencies. And I wasn't getting enough vitamin D, so I just pop a pill. And growing up in India where it's sunny all the time and you spend time outside, you don't think about vitamin D. And here I'm not outside as much. Anyway, so yeah, so measuring vitamin level in blood, absolutely. Measuring, the blood panel does a lot. It doesn't have to be vitamins. It could be a whole bunch of different things, and you're looking at nutrients. You can also survey people. How often do you go hungry to bed? Right?
What about energy levels? Can we, if you're lacking certain things over a period of time, your energy does go down. If there's not enough, is this starch? No.
Energy levels are tricky. Everyone has a different metabolic rate, but absolutely, if you're short on food, your energy levels are likely to be lower. Energy levels have to be almost a self-compare to measure nutritional activity, and it ends up getting self-reported because you really don't know what the person's energy level was in the first place. It's a tricky one. It's not that it can't be used. It can be, but you have to specify the context. So lots of different measures to measure nutritional adequacy. Are they getting enough calories a day? Are they getting enough fat? Are they having too much of something? Are they having too little of something? All these are measures of nutritional adequacy. Typically, if you took the nutrition course in gerontology, or if you have taken any other nutritional course, or you work in long-term care, and you're aware of how the nutritionist works, is they're trying to meet the required daily allowance. So it's called the RDA. Required daily allowance is what health experts, Health Canada, National Institutes of Health in the US, they ask you to meet a certain amount for each vitamin, each mineral, so much protein, so many calories through fat, so many calories through carbohydrate, and X number of grams of protein a day. So that's your recommended daily allowance. So your recommended daily allowance is, do the meals meet the RDA? That could be a question you want to ask. So different measures, they're all measurable. So that's a good thing. And that's what we want. We want variables that can be measured. So good. Maturity. This one's a tricky one. We need variables for maturity, measurable variables.
Okay, let's be superficial and start with age.
Oh, stop. As much as I enjoy humor in the classroom, I'm not going to accept age.
How about gender?
Stop again. Sorry, I'm going to ignore age and gender. Again, let's think about variables for maturity. Jesse. Oh yes, I love that. Jesse says response to situations. So it has to be measurable, Jesse. So you want to tweak your answer a little bit?
So, like BuzzFeed and other online inquiries will have test your mental age or test your maturity level by showing people images as well as time. They'll have to see in some people that's a little bit more immature, and some people will see something more practical.
Okay, so Jesse's explanation, if people online did not catch it, there are lots of online tests that BuzzFeed and other websites offer. And the response to your tests, because those tests are based on situations, gives you a maturity or a mental age score. Did I get that right? So, so what I would say is maturity is test scores for maturity. That's a variable, absolutely, because the test score for you, me, 10 other people, they're all going to be different, and there's going to be a number. That's a great answer.
Can we do age group of friends?
Age group of friends. Is it, okay. So if you have all older friends, would you be more mature? Is that what you're suggesting?
From personal experience, yes.
We can put that in there, and we don't know. Let's put it in as a variable, and we test the hypothesis if it's true or not if we do a study, okay? Sometimes hypotheses are accurate, sometimes they aren't, and we don't know the answer. Age group of friends.
What about someone's ability to maintain relationships, like friendships and relationships?
Ability to maintain friendships and relationships. Ability to...
How would you measure that? Would you say?
That's a great question. So I'm
would you say-
going to let you answer that. Like the two.
I don't have the answer. I was just.
How about
Friendship
friendship?
maturity.
How about friendships you've retained from high school?
Yeah,
till,
years together as a
yeah.
friend group. Yeah.
Ability to, how do you measure that? So we're saying measurable is number of friends retained for an extended period of time. Is that what you both agree on?
Yeah,
That
that
makes sense.
you've gone through the life phases with.
Oh, number of friends that you've gone through several life stages.
Now, I would argue that two immature people can be friends for a long time by leaning on each other's immaturity.
And that's a great argument.
Fair.
I can't disagree with that. That is absolutely valid. You can have two mature people who are fantastic friends and they've been through many life stages together and nothing's changed. Yeah, true. Okay, let's think of other measures of maturity. So Courtney says, ability to resolve conflicts, or number of conflicts resolved interpersonally in a time period. So Courtney says number of conflicts resolved interpersonally, or that the person encountered themselves in a month, in a year, whatever you want. But that would be something that could be documented and measured. Great. So my favorites are the number of conflicts I really like, because that's a measurable and that actually reflects maturity. So it's a valid variable. I like the test scores on maturity tests because you could argue that if you become an expert at taking those tests, you'd score very highly, but you'd still be immature. But practically for most people who don't take those tests on a regular basis, those situational responses are probably reflective in some way, shape, or form. They may not be 100%, but they could.
What about number of hobbies? I mean, it's just, I don't know if that would express maturity, but it would seem like the people with more extracurricular activities would have a higher maturity level.
That I would put that in the basket of I would love to test that. I don't know the answer. So let's just write it down. Number of hobbies or co-curriculars. I don't know. What does the class think?
I think that as a student and a mom, I don't have time for hobbies, but I'm still pretty mature.
Right, and so that's, I see examples both ways. I love my mom dearly, so I don't want the class to think otherwise. She's 68 years old. She's absolutely fantastic, but I often joke with her that you're a 16-year-old trapped in the body of a 68-year-old. So, and she has many, 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 many hobbies, more than she can count on. And so it's a hobby a day. And she's good at all her hobbies. She pursues them to completion. There's nothing wrong with that. But, she's like a child. She's very childlike. It's wonderful to be like her because it's almost like I'm raising a teenager, but she's just older. But anyway.
You can also look at it that an older person could be mature, but unable to, they have physical limitations, so they can't participate in extra activities.
That too, right?
Can we also measure other people's opinions? I guess that's not how many people suggest that they are immature. You know what I mean? So it's measurable.
So you're taking an opinion poll of a person and having their friends vote on what they think their maturity level is. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, you can absolutely measure that, opinion polls.
How about measuring it based on their experiences are like a a person survived World War One, they survived World War Two, they survived the Great Depression, those significant moments in history. How about a person who's lived that long too, that you're able to measure those things?
I don't know what you would measure, but that's again suggesting that because you survived a certain phase, you would have acquired a certain amount of maturity. And I don't necessarily agree with that. Just because again, it's you know, that's saying that okay, you've hit a certain age, so you must be mature. You're a certain gender, so you must be more mature. You must have gone through a certain number of experiences, hence you're more mature. It's hard because everyone responds to different experiences in life differently, and it's what they do with what they've experienced moving further. That's what suggests maturity, right? So it is a complex concept, and you know they put these concepts out there for a reason. They want us to think. So I think we're doing that. So that's a good thing. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next one, which is socio-emotional development. This is more like social intelligence kind of thing. And it does tie in with maturity a little bit. I'll leave that aside for now because I want to go on and finish these questions and perhaps get started on the next chapter. Okay. What is the difference between a hypothesis and a research objective? I think Connie defined what a hypothesis is. Connie, if you don't mind restating what a hypothesis is.
It's a statement that predicts relationships between variables.
Statement that suggests relationship or predicts relationship between two variables or two concepts. Okay, what's a research objective? Somebody else? You don't have to define it, like you don't have to have a textbook definition, but just think about what it is and tell me what you think it is. So it's a statement.
I think it tries to identify themes.
That attempts, it may try to identify themes. That's one option. Attempts to describe or understand the factors that influence or relate to a subject in question. Now, this is my description of a research objective. A research objective is often because you have, for example, we don't know that if you had many shared experiences, you are wiser, or if you had, so what was one of the things we spoke about emotional maturity? The more number of friends that you've had for a longer period of time, you are more emotionally mature. But perhaps we can put it as a research objective saying, what are the factors that impacts emotional maturity in older adults? Okay, so we're not suggesting there's a relationship. We talk to people, we try to identify themes, as Connie said. That could be one thing. We might even identify different variables, different things that change by talking to people, and we identify it's not just the number of friends, it's the number of shared experiences, it's the number of difficult, challenging situations that you've been together to support each other and come out of and be successful. So a research objective is a statement that does not necessarily suggest a relationship between two variables, and it's often used when you don't know enough about the relationship between two variables. For example, if you don't know the impact of partying 3 times a week, then you don't want a hypothesis saying increased partying over the week results in poorer examination scores for students. You might want to go in with a research objective saying, the objective of this research is to identify the impact of extensive partying on final exam scores. Okay, so you're not going in with a known fixed objective. You're not suggesting that one causes the other, and you're going in and you're exploring the fact. Whether it's a research objective, and a research objective does not have to be qualitative alone. A research objective can be there for quantitative research too. Anytime you don't know enough to suggest a relationship between two variables, when you know enough, you have a hypothesis, okay? More partying causes poorer exam grades. You're almost sure of it. You're going in with a hypothesis. The only thing that can happen is you either find answers that validate it or you find answers that disprove it. When you are a little bit more clueless and you have lesser information, then you say, well, the objective of this research is to look at the impact of extensive partying on exam scores, okay? So that's the difference. Okay, good. Question 10. To what does the question of validity refer?
A level of accuracy or truthfulness?
Accuracy or truthfulness. Fantastic. So if you were to write an answer, how would you frame it?
To question the level of validity, you measure the accuracy and truthfulness of the information provided. So if it's logical and where it's come from.
So this chapter deals entirely with variables and concepts. So they're talking about validity of a variable. So when you think about validity of a variable, what must a concept validly do for a variable? It must accurately and truthfully represent a concept, right? So that's what this question is referring to. To what does the question of validity refer? The question of validity refers to the idea or the notion that a variable truthfully and accurately represents a concept. Because if it doesn't do that, then measuring that variable is completely useless. Okay, let's say, for example, if you were to measure, if you would say you're measuring fitness for the average person, and you'd say the number of pull-ups that you can do accurately measures your physical fitness. No, that might be a measure for extreme athletes. The average person probably can do 0 pull-ups or maybe 1 pull-up. So that's not an accurate measure, right? So it has to accurately represent the concept that you're trying to measure. I don't know if we did this in any degree of detail. Question 11, what is an operational definition? So there's the hypothesis, right, which is a statement that suggests a relationship between two concepts. And let's take the example of a hypothetical situation, number of hours of study, greater exam marks, or greater performance. Let's do greater performance. Oh, sorry. I think I want a different example here. So I'm going to change this. Amount of study. And better performance. As you can see, this kind of a diagram suggesting a relationship between two concepts, there's no measurables here. So this hypothesis is still conceptual. It's called a conceptual hypothesis. Why is it called conceptual? Because it's dealing with two concepts, right? Conceptual because it's dealing with concepts. To make it measurable, you got to do a couple of things. When we say amount of study, you can say number of hours per week. And when you say better performance, you can say GPA, something that has a number. Oh, not sorry, what happened there? Cancel. Okay. The difference between the boxes on top and the boxes at the bottom or underneath are simply that when it's conceptual, you can't measure anything. You still suggest a relationship. So that's a conceptual hypothesis. But at the bottom, what you have is stuff that you can measure. Okay, and this is called an operational hypothesis. Okay, when you go from conceptual hypothesis to operational hypothesis, the process is called operationalization. So an operational definition of a hypothesis suggests a relationship between two variables that accurately represent the concepts being studied. Okay, an operational definition is an operational or measurable form of the hypothesis that uses variables of the concepts being studied. Now, they give you a problem to try. State the following hypothesis in an operational form. So let's first diagram it conceptually. The better a student's nutritional status, the better that student's classroom behavior will be. So what are the two concepts here? And wonderful, so this is conceptual. We need to operationalize this hypothesis. Okay. Nutritional status. Let's operationalize nutritional status.
BMIs can be for nutritional status?
BMI, unfortunately, is not a measure of nutritional status. BMI is what you already are. So when you measure BMI, what you do is you have the person stand on a scale, you get their weight, and then you get their height. Okay, so it's body mass in relation to height and supposed body surface area. So it's not measuring whether you've had enough food, whether the food you've had is right. So unfortunately, we aren't able to use BMI as a measure of nutritional status. We can measure it long term. Somebody has a high BMI, they are obese, and so they have had prolonged or chronic malnutrition, so to speak, because they're either overweight or underweight. But really what this is looking for is nutritional status. Think in terms of children paying attention in class, because you're dealing with classroom behaviors, right? So you're thinking about younger students, younger children. It could be university students too, but let's make it simpler and let's think about kids. Nutritional status. Number of days per week breakfast was eaten.
We can do breakfast eaten and like attention span in a period of time.
Week breakfast. So we have to have measurables. That's when it's operational. So if you say attention span as classroom behavior, what would you measure, Kylie?
I would measure like their own level of like what they would choose to be like, yes, I was paying attention this much, I was paying attention this much, like I was distracted how many times throughout the class.
So you're the person observing for classroom behavior and attention, okay? You have a pen and paper and you're observing, let's say 10 students. What are you looking for? What are you going to make a check mark to say it happened once?
So gestures, like eye contact, communicating with the teacher, answering questions. So just overall activity within the classroom of each student.
So to make it simple, so number of times, attentive behavior observed, or lack of inattentive behavior observed, because it's easier to measure inattention than attention. So if you're in a classroom, it's easy to measure when students look away while the teacher is talking. It's easy to measure children playing with their hair. Sorry, Aretha.
No, I didn't say anything.
Oh, you didn't? Okay, never mind. I just heard someone in the background. Okay, so if you're in a classroom measuring inattention,
would that be number of distractions?
Number of distractions. It could be, so those are easy to document. So you sit down with a piece of pen and paper, you're sitting in the back of the class, the teacher is talking, and you start to see, you have the list of all 10 students in class, and you have a checkbox, and you have I'm just naming students. I would never name students this way, but let's just pretend, and you're counting the number of behaviors in a 30-minute period. And you see someone twirling their hair, that's inattention. You see someone looking away, that's inattention. Then the hair twirler looks around and looks at somebody else's notebook. Then you see third student completely focused, no inattentive behavior, same for the fourth. The fifth one starts looking at their shoes, starts looking at the door, and starts scribbling on their notebook. Okay, so you start to count. So these are signs of inattention. So you're sitting down in the classroom, you're making checks. I mean, at some point you're going to total them up and have a physical number at the end of it. Then you see number C, suddenly all this while they were focused, they turn around and they start chatting and they're teasing with their friend. D decides that they're going to make a little paper ball and throw it on somebody. Okay, so and then you start to wonder, well, what's going on? And then after class, you ask the child, hey, did you have breakfast today? And says, yes. This one says, yes. Then you ask them what they had. This one says, yes. This one says, no. This one says, yes. And I tell you why they didn't have breakfast. But at least you are able to document over a 7-day period while you're observing these students. Well, did they have breakfast today? And what's it doing to their focus in class? Okay, so this is how... Sorry, go ahead.
You need to know the nutritional quality of the breakfast, though?
That's important, and that's a deeper question, right? That's a second level question. So whenever you start a research project, and you might be able to do it at the same time. You can talk to them. Did you have breakfast? Yes or no? And then you can also go into, well, so for example, what you can do is, as you're making a little data collection sheet, you can have your students A, B, C, D, E, and you're observing them. This is a sheet for day 1. This is not a sheet for all 5 days. So you have a number of behaviors, and we're just making this up as we go along. So you go once, you go 3 times, you go once, you have none, and then you say breakfast. And they say yes, no, yes, yes, no, and then you ask them to describe what they ate in breakfast. So what did they eat? So eggs, toast, pancakes. Oh, this one said no, so no breakfast here. Pancakes. It says I had a muffin. So I just had juice this morning. I didn't actually eat a breakfast. Okay, so you do this on a Monday, then you have a similar sheet for a Tuesday and a Wednesday. So, and you could even ask how many, do you know how many eggs was there in your toast? If it's a kid, most kids don't know because mom or dad makes up their food for them, so they don't care how many eggs is in there. They're just going to eat it, right? So they might not know. You might get a more of a qualitative read on what they're getting for breakfast, more not necessarily quantitative need. But if you had to investigate further, you could send notebook home for the parents to fill out as to what they're feeding their child for breakfast, and they would accurately tell you, well, it was 2 eggs and 2 slices of bread, or it was 3 pancakes topped up with some butter and maple syrup and a few blueberries, or whatever be the case. And then you'd get details on the nutrition itself. Now, if you have the nutritional details, you would just, these days, because it's quite convenient to do, you just go to an online app like MyFitnessPal, put that data in, and it would give you the caloric and nutritional breakdown of the meal itself. So now you know if they had breakfast, how much of breakfast did they have, and what nutritional value it held. So you would be able to make the relationship much stronger at that point in time. Okay, we will get started on the next chapter. I'm not sure we'll finish, but that's always something for Thursday, right? Okay. The next chapter is talking about a variable's measurement. So before we use a variable, we have to always figure out what varies, right? Otherwise, it's not a variable if it doesn't vary, but what in that variable varies. So for example, when you use a thermometer, what varies? Temperature. Specifically in the temperature, what is the measurable that varies? Degrees Celsius or degrees Fahrenheit, right? Unless you had a chemistry lab thermometer, which measures things in degrees Kelvin, right? But for most parts, for the most situations, we only measure degrees Celsius or degrees Fahrenheit, okay? So what is it that varies? That is your variable. Once you have a variable, it's great to know the temperature has changed. You have to measure it. So what's your measuring instrument? Your measuring instrument, if it is temperature, then it would be a thermometer. If it is weight, it would be a scale, and so on, right? So what's the instrument that you measure the variable with? And then, of course, what are the units? If it's temperature, it's degrees something. If it's weight, then it's kilograms or pounds. So you have to know what's varying. In the case of physical growth, what are the things that can vary? So what's a variable in physical growth?
Weight.
Weight, excellent. Okay, what's the instrument that you'd measure weight with? Scale, weighing scale. And what are the units?
Kilograms.
Okay, so before you use a variable, okay, say you're using weight as a variable, you have to think about how you're going to measure it. So the idea here is that you have to think about how you're going to measure stuff and what the units are going to look like, right? That's important. So there's a logical order as to how you go through the process of wanting to measure what you want to measure. So let's first define concept. So we'll go back to the same example just to stay consistent. Let's say the concept is growth. And we identified a variable in growth. We're saying weight. Then we are going to devise a measuring instrument. We say we're going to use a scale. And then we're going to, well, you don't have to devise units because your scale probably comes with units, but in some situations when you measure stuff, you're going to have to devise a scale. And we'll talk about that example in a second. And it always follows that order, okay? So let's pick something else. So let's define a different concept. Let's talk about ageism. Okay, ageism is your concept, so we'll put that here. Okay. So you're going to have to select something that changes between two people. One person is more ageist than the other. So there's a variable. What's your variable going to be? What changes?
Attitudes?
Oh, who said that? That was excellent.
I did.
Thank you. Correct. So what's your measuring instrument to measure attitude?
I guess questions related to being ageist and whether people.
Correct. And they would form an attitude scale. Okay. We'll talk about what an attitudinal scale looks like. I think it's in the second half of this chapter, but I just want you to get to the idea that you can measure ageism, racism, sexism. All of those isms can be measured using attitudinal scales. So you have an attitudinal scale, it's going to have a score. So your unit in this place would be a score. So depending on how the scale is created, scores, maximum score is a 30. If you're a 30 on 30, in this case, it's not a good thing because you're horribly ageist. And if you are midway, then you're ageist in some ways and not ageist in others, and so on, okay? So, but the order is always the same. First, you have to define your concepts. Then you have to pick your variable that represents the concept, obviously. Then you pick your measuring instruments. How are you going to measure this thing? And then you may have to devise units, such as an ageism score or whatever it is, if you don't have units already. And it's always this order of measurement, okay? Okay, let's look at some examples. Well, we did growth, so we won't do growth. But heat. Okay, so what's the variable for heat?
Temperature?
Temperature, thank you. What's the measuring instrument? Thermometer, right?
Coming back to distractions, you could do the distractions per hour.
Oh, let's do that. Give me a second. Let's just finish this up. We'll go to classroom attention or whatever we decided then. Instrument and then units, degree C or F. Well, we'll do age later. We'll go with classroom attention. So what's the variable? What would you suggest the variable is here? What changes in classroom attention?
I want to say like eyes looking forward.
Okay, so let's say distracted eyes or attentive focus, or let's say eyes forward, eyes. Do you want to say eyes? Well, eyes forward, so eyes on teacher or text or board. So how would you measure that, Cassie? What's your instrument? Sorry, what's your instrument of measure? Your instrument of measure, piece of paper to record. I'm just going to say data sheet. And what are your units? What's going to change? Number of times student looks away. Or engages in alternate behaviors. Okay, so thinking of different concepts, there are different ways to address that. Okay, what about age? Age, what's your variable for age?
Number of years old.
Okay, age is a tricky one because your variable is number of years. And that is also your unit, a measurable unit is also number of years. What's your measuring instrument?
Sorry.
Actually, a variable is time. It's not number of years. My mistake. Your variable is time. And your measuring instrument would be, if you're measuring age, oops, that wasn't me, was it? Probably was me. Anyway, your instrument would be a calendar. And I don't know if anybody uses a calendar these days, but let's say hypothetically you're measuring years, you use a calendar either electronically or by paper, but you use a calendar and the unit would be number of years. So are you understanding? Is everybody understanding how this works? How we go from, okay, good. Okay, academic performance. So let's look at a variable for academic performance. What's a variable for academic performance?
Grades.
Variable is grades. What's your measuring instrument? So if you had to study grades of a bunch of students, what would be your measuring instrument be?
Test scores.
Sorry, I had two responses. Let's try that one more time.
Test scores.
Then what would your units be? Okay, you're measuring instruments, what you use to actually measure. So you have to think about it this way. You want to study the difference in grades between a bunch of students. Okay, how are you going to measure each student's grade? How do you know each student did? What's going to change? Like, what would be your instrument to measure? You'd need the transcripts, whether they're online, whether they're on paper. That's the stuff that will tell you the difference between one student and the next in terms of grade, correct? And your actual units of measures would be your, not your test scores, maybe your course scores, because on transcripts you don't get test scores. So your course marks. Okay. Academic performance, if you're just looking at one course, then that would be a little different. Your variable would still be grades, yes. And in this situation, you're measuring instruments would be your, if you're a prof, you'd look at the D2L component of each student's performance through the assignments. Okay, D2L data sheet. And your units would be actual scores or marks. Okay. So there are, well, okay, there are some differences between the social versus natural sciences. And the way we look at it, so the natural sciences have fixed measures, and that's what we're going to, we'll cover this in next lecture because we are getting towards the end of this one. So what I want all of you to do is think of each of these concepts: educational attainment, social class, quality of teaching, motivation, social integration, and race. These are all typically things that we look at in the social sciences. And of course, this is a very small smattering of topics. There are a lot more things that we look at. But think about the variables, think about the measuring instrument, and think about the actual measures in all of this. Natural sciences is quite simple, right? For example, you're doing growth, as we spoke about. We're doing heat. We're thinking of, I don't know, speed. You think of all these concepts, it's quite easy to pick a variable that's representative, find a measuring instrument, and actually find measures. These concepts, each of these, are actually far more challenging. And if you all did this as a little mental exercise and we discuss this next class, we will probably find multiple variables for educational attainment, multiple for social class, multiple for quality of teaching, same for motivation, and so on. So just go ahead and think about variables, think about measuring instrument, and think about units for these, okay? All right, well, I will let the class leave that's physically here. They all have other lectures to be at, but I am available for the next few minutes online if anybody has any questions or comments.
I missed last week, or I missed Fridays because I had a colonoscopy. No, Thursdays because I had a colonoscopy.
Yeah.
I said I missed the last lecture because
yes, I heard that. Sorry. Yes, I heard that.
So I was wondering what material was covered for that.
There should be a video on D2L which taped the lecture. So you should have the entire lecture on D2L. You should be able to go see it.
Okay.
Okay, and the same. Sorry, has everyone left? I'll before everybody leaves, very briefly. Let me see if everybody's left. I'll make this announcement next time because it's not fair to the rest of the class. Midterm will be exclusively multiple choice. Okay.
Okay.
And you will receive question banks to practice with. So just like you've been receiving question banks for the previous chapters, you will have question banks. Your multiple choice questions will come from the question bank. So there's no reason for you all to not ace the midterm, okay?
Wonderful.
I'm not giving you the answers to the multiple choice. You still are going to have to work to find the answers, because if I did that, then it's not a test anymore, okay? All right, so you'll have the practice bank, master the bank.
Okay.
All right. All right. Take care.
Okay, bye.
Bye. Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you. See you all on Thursday.
Quick question, Krishnan. Will you be posting the question bank for chapter 5?
Yes. So just give me, usually it takes me a couple of days to download the question bank and put it up. So for chapter 5, chapter 6, I will be putting them up shortly.
Thank you.
No problem.